Hello, everybody. Bonjour. I'm feeling very comfortable up here because I just spent the last yesterday afternoon and this morning on this platform. This is where the financing discussions were being held, which I'm about to talk to you about. And we had a very, very engaged, very committed group of people who worked really, really hard over the afternoon and the morning. And I guess I've been asked to try and keep my summary comments to 3 or 4 minutes. I think each of us has something to say about one of the tracks. So let me just give you a very, very high-level report. These participants, as I say, were intensely engaged throughout our discussion. And it's a substantive, a weighty, dense topic, actually, so they had to be willing to cover a lot of ground. We didn't try for consensus on a few key strategies. I think that would have been too difficult to do, but we did achieve a common understanding of what's possible and of what some of the opportunities are for achieving more sustainable and diversified financing under terms and conditions that support our operations as well as our outputs. And I think that's really a critical point. There's no point in having more funding if it's only more funding for projects and not more funding for operations. We all agree. So we identified multiple questions to work on, issues that we're all familiar with. I think we had a bit of at least I had a bit of an aha at the end of our first working session, because we asked people to work on issues and then we got a reporting back on those issues, and we heard things expressed in terms of barriers, challenges, things to overcome, problems, weaknesses, and I realized that actually that is the way we talk a lot about issues, and that it was important to focus on our strengths and not our weaknesses, and our opportunities and not our challenges. So in the second session, when people were talking about the kinds of outcomes that they'd like to see, we got this very positive, creative spirit going. And you heard from Marcel Gauthier this morning the outcomes that we came up with. We actually came up with a large number of outcomes in our the 4 areas that we had asked people to speak about in financing, which were, of course, again, grants and contributions, the main sources of revenue for the charitable nonprofit sector: grants and contributions, earned income, philanthropy, and then this 4th category of what we called financial literacy or financial capacity, really, sort of the ability to think about your financing models and to think creatively about how you combine those sources of income and perhaps others, such as the new forms of social financing like debt or investments. Today, we talked about making personal, organizational, and national level commitments to action. And again, it was a very positive spirit in the room. We ended up with 132 undertakings of various kinds. That was impressive out of our group. And we have captured them all. We have all of this raw data, but I'll just give you some examples. And these undertakings were all undertakings that we would commit to over the next year. I felt that it was hard to ask people to make a commitment to do something that had a 5-year span. So we were talking about over the next year, what could we do personally? Some examples. Someone said, well, I'm just going to give more next year, even if we don't get the stretch tax credit, which I thought was very noble of whoever it was. But I think something we can all do easily. To participate in more learning opportunities, to try and build the skills, the financial management skills that the person who said that they want to do this, they want to build their financial skills. Organizationally, to commit money, and a specific sum of money, to making social investments in the coming year, to contribute the organization's data to Imagine's charity focus as a specific undertaking. These are certainly things that are easily doable and will contribute materially to the outcomes that were identified as important. And nationally, to support Imagine in a national awareness campaign to promote the sector to investors and to donors as a productive and accountable focus for them. There's great interest, I would say, in this group and I'm sure this is true of all of you. There's great interest in reading and reflecting and reporting on what was generated yesterday and today. I had many comments, saying, we really need to have this. We want to know what we all said. It's all captured in this wonderful technology of co-vision. We have to have it. So I think that's something that we need to take back and talk about. Marcel, I think, will address that in a minute. I'd also say, finally, that there was a great interest in being part of next steps in the process of building what we're building, which is a sectoral understanding of our possibilities, of our opportunities, and momentum on commonly agreed strategies and goals. And I certainly think coming out of the financing discussion, there was that sense that we were building that common understanding. There was much that could be taken back to people's organizations. There's already a commitment to have regional meetings of organizations to talk over what was learned and heard at the summit. And I think that's something that we as national organizations and as co-hosts can talk about now. How can we help you take this forward in the next year? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I was part of the attracting and retaining staff across the sector, and as Hilary said, we had a very dynamic group, a number of people from the sector whose job is HR for various organizations. So we had a rich discussion of people that were really familiar with the area. And then we had a number of other people that were there to think about and talk about how do we actually keep our most precious resource and how do we build on that. And we started out with, they gave us 4 big areas we were going to discuss, similar to, I guess, the 4, not the same ones, but we had 4. We then went off and came up with 11. Oh, what a surprise. And then we said, okay, how are we going to winnow that back down and really start to look at how we can create an action plan? So we did a voting thing online, and we came up with 3 big areas that we want to address, we feel the sector has to address to go forward. And then we did the same sort of thing. We asked people what their commitment was individually, what they could do in their organization or in their region or provincially, and then what could we do, what could they do nationally. And I won't go into all that. We probably have 40 or 50 action ideas and commitments from people, which I will not spend the time going over in detail. But the 3 big areas that we talked about that we feel the sector collectively has to much more intentionally address. The first is work on a more strategic way to look at the whole HR infrastructure and develop that across the country, with a focusing on staff, how do we keep them long-term, and really being intentional about our staff resources. Coupled with funding, this will take new resources. Where will that come from? And an evaluation and outcome toolkit that all organizations can use with a real focus on staff. So that was the first. The second, and it may link into your group, Marcel, was around developing and implementing a public education campaign about the role of the sector, but from the point of view of the staff part of the sector and how much of an infrastructure is there that's critical for the sustenance of both the sector and Canadian society, and the consequences of not doing that. And the third is develop a national leadership program, including engaging boards of directors, because a number of organizations agreed that a lot of times it was the board that don't understand what it takes to have a staff complement and ensure that that is capable. So we're looking at a program that would lead to accreditation of standards based on respecting training, competency, and ethics. So it would be probably linked to the Standards Council, but more with a focus on HR. So I think time-wise, it's probably not a good idea to go into some examples of what we said in terms of people's personal commitment. A number of people committed to do something in their organization to raise awareness about what we talked about in this summit. Others talked about in provinces, how do they work together more collaboratively? There's a number of HR groups. How do we work better? How do they work better together? a number of coalitions and people talking more about caring for the staff and how do we make sure that we're focused on that. And then a number of other commitments nationally to have provincial groups worried about HR connect with the sector council. And that actually led us into another discussion because we had a different kind of, we didn't have an elephant and a mouse, we just had an elephant. And the elephant in our room was that we have created a sector council, a human resource sector council. And people agreed it was a fantastic resource. It had an unbelievable website to be able to assist, especially small and medium-sized organizations, take in a variety of areas best practice and implement it. And we have a challenge now because the funding from that, from HRSDC, is winding down. So we have about a year and some months. So by March 2013, the funding for that will change and end, change or end from the federal government. And it might narrow, but the narrowing of that funding may not be in the best interest of the sector long term. So the board of the Sector Council is meeting on Friday and Saturday of this week and again in February to really map out a new strategy for the Council. It'll need a new funding model, a revitalization of its mandate, and a way in which it can sustain itself. And our group felt that the collective ideas and strategies and commitments and advocacy support that we generate in our group could be made available for consideration by the Council and perhaps guide them in their creation, I think, of a renewed mission and then a strategy going out for the sector, because this would be a terrible resource to lose. So we want to support them, and we would like to have the results of their planning session come back to the follow-up process to this to be able to work more collectively to sustain that resource. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ian Bird from Community Foundations of Canada, and I was at the National Gallery last night with many of you, and I walked into the Canadiana Gallery and just on my way to see the Group of Seven. And I sort of stopped, and on the right-hand wall there was a painting by Robert Harris. It was painted in 1885, and some of you will know it from one of those Historica minutes. It's the meeting of the school trustees. And so sure enough, there were 4 volunteers gathered around the school teacher, Kate Henderson, in what was clearly a robust discussion of competing ideas. So there's 125 years later, and we were up on the mezzanine level having a similar such robust contestation of ideas. Good for us and good for them. It attests to the Canadian approach of coming together and sorting out a way forward. And indeed, in the case of Ms. Henderson, really meaningful reforms and changes. So the outcomes of the discussion on volunteering that I was involved in really had 4 primary outcomes that are worth sharing with you. One is we did a remarkable job of generating ideas and a deep, deep data pool. The folks from CoVision were telling us afterwards that we have sort of shot the moon, set the records about the amount of ideas available to us. And there's a huge data mining exercise that clearly needs to follow on so that we don't lose any of that. That's one. The second thing is through the process, and as we navigated the facilitation strategy, we were generating many objectives, not just when we were on the task of setting objectives, but even beforehand as action-oriented folks that we are. So we have some 34 objectives that, again, are going to need that synthesis and that bringing together to make accessible for us so we can take that next action. And in the spirit of committing to action, Volunteer Canada has agreed to take that task on and to pull these things together so that people can align their many contributions against those objectives. The third thing was a really important critical reflection about our assumptions around volunteering. the shift and the possibilities and change in mindset about, and even finding new language associated with civic engagement, community participation, citizenship, volunteering, that there was a broadening of the language and the courses of action, and that even just in challenging some of our core assumptions, we were making progress. And that broader conversation clearly has to continue, because we were still having it right up until 12:05 when we were told we had to leave we had to leave the room. But there's 4 things in that I'll just share as my final point. That there's a thematic here that's a shift from an organizational-centered view to a people-centered view. That there's an interest in the personal and the meaningful engagement, which I think is something we should all take on board about the way in which we engage people in our work. There's clearly this focus on citizenship and reclaiming that as sort of full participation in our democracy. And indeed, the young leaders from Apathy is Boring showed us how democracy can work to good effect in our session. And the 4th thematic is around simple action. I went through some of the data at the end, and sure enough, our Mayor Nenshi, has taught us something, because over and over what you saw was, how about we keep it simple? 3 actions, 3 things we can do. It just keeps coming back. So that's our takeaway, and it's our collective job, and everyone in the room committed as all that material comes back to find their way into it and to identify what they can do, the 3 simple things. Thanks so much.
Merci beaucoup. Je veux profiter de...
Thank you. I want to take this opportunity to thank our partners. And the 4 partners together have made this summit possible, and although we talk a lot about Imagine Canada. So thanks again. In our group, we've had robust conversations, thanks to Lynn Toupin, who was our facilitator.
Discussions, but good discussions, challenging ones, healthy, huge amounts of interest, and also huge amounts of interest from people who have been online, not just in the narrative group, but in every one of the other groups we were getting all kinds of input from people across the country who have been participating in the summit online. It's always more difficult, of course, for people. I shouldn't say it's more difficult, because a lot of the input we're getting was certainly as good or superior, but often difficult for people to do that on their own. So I want to thank everyone for having participated in that, and we are catching all of that. On the narrative side, I think where we came down in the end was that there are really 2 streams of work. One is a very tactical one, one around, and you could in a way talk about a type of an FAQ, answers and questions around those questions that are constantly being asked by the media, by our funders, particularly by the media, around administrative costs, about salaries, around accountability. What are those answers that we can give to Canadians in a more collective way? What are the answers that we can put forward? We've started to do that, but I think we need to do it in a much more effective way. So we saw that as very tactical, something that we need to do urgently. It's probably less about the narrative than about providing good answers that we can then share amongst each other and look at ways of continuing to improve it. The second stream, which is clearly the more important one and as urgent, is the narrative about who we are as a sector. And coming at it from a very strong assets-based, from a strengths-based approach. And people were referring to the way Sean Atleo was talking about this morning. So not just about recrimination, but very much about something exciting happening, a time of opportunity, so that the narrative that we develop together, and we need to do this urgently, really is well anchored in that asset base, in that sense of excitement. And we talked about the importance of the 3 pillars and how the 3rd pillar, however we want to call this, we are as exciting and there are as many opportunities, and we need to talk about that, and that both are urgent and in fact complementary. In terms of the actions, like the other groups, huge list of actions coming from both people online and people in the room. Certainly, I think there is strong agreement that we need that framework around that FAQ, something we can work together on, and we need to do that over the next few months. We need to move on that quickly. We talked about creation of a SWAT team because we want to do this quickly also over the next 6 or 8 months to develop that narrative, and we hope that many of you will agree to participate in that. We talked about a LinkedIn group to continue the discussions. We talked about a quick response team. So all of these ideas were put forward, and I think many of them we will be moving with very, very quickly. I'm also happy that my colleagues, Carolyn Resborough from World Vision and Lee Rose from Charity Village have agreed to stay on in this group as co-leads to help move this forward. We also talked in our group, because everyone was making commitments, that there is an honor system here. We expect that people will deliver and continue to want to work with us. So that's from the narrative group's perspective. If we look at the whole, in terms of next steps, this is the first time we've used a co-vision technology, and I want to thank our co-vision colleagues. I think it's been very effective, but we now have to, as Ian was saying, we have to mine that. There's huge amount of information, sometimes frustration from people that they weren't seeing what they were proposing on the screen, and that's understandable. We want to make sure that everyone has what came out. There were some beautiful gems in there that did not make it up onto the screens. So we will provide to everyone the raw data on each one of the groups, so that you will have access to everything that has been said. That will be the first step. A second step is we will want to come to you early in the year with a report on what actually has happened, a list of the actions and the recommendations coming forward. Tomorrow morning, the advisory committee and the partner organizations are coming together for a debrief. So we will be going through what came out of the last 2 days and looking at how we can move forward, and we will report back to you on that also. We hope that the number of commitments, some have been in writing, certainly we have them in co-vision, that your commitments, whether they be individual, regional, or national, that we expect that you will follow up and that you will stay connected to all of us, and we will find ways to facilitate that. We also want, of course, others to come on board, and we hope that when you leave, that you will talk about the summit, you will talk about what has come out of it, the raw data that you will have, you can share that, because we hope that many other people will come on board. The theme throughout the summit has been that this is about mutual accountability. This is not about one or two organizations taking all of this on. It's about all of us working collectively. We know that's challenging, but there are ways that we can actually do this. A reminder also that the summit is part of the National Engagement Strategy, which is continuing. The summit is not the end of the National Engagement Strategy. On the contrary, it's a part of it, an important part of it, that's going to continue to develop the stimulus to move forward even more quickly. So we want to be very clear with you that we will follow up on all of this. You will be getting information on what came out. We, on the other hand, expect that the commitments and that the ideas that you put forward, you will follow through. I'm going to stop there, and we will move on to our speaker, who will give us all kinds of inspiration to continue working together. Merci.